Welcome to the Building Efficiency Resources Podcast, the BERcast. We're back with Season 2, Episode 2, where we are actually honoring some fallen heroes of the HERS industry. We are going to be honoring David Goldstein as well as Ken Williamson for their enduring legacy in supporting the building performance industry. We're going to have a couple of esteemed guests on. Steve Baden with RESNET and Philip Fairey with the Florida Solar Energy Center. But going ahead and rolling into segment 1, we had a kickoff of the BERcast Season 2. It's out there and pressed and published out there on the interwebs. Sandy, it's good to be back here for Episode 2. Excited to talk to you today. How you doing today?
I'm good, my brother. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm in your home state right now. Sandy's over there on the east side of the state. I'm over on the west side. I came out for a little bit of a client meeting. And so for those who are seeing the video out here on the interwebs, they're going to see that I'm a little bit pink because I went out to the beach today and I crisped up my Detroit face and skin with some nice solar rays from the sunny state of Florida. It was a nice reprieve to get out of the cold and snow. I kind of get it now, Sandy. I got to admit, usually I'm a little bit kind of like, Florida, really? I don't know about that.
You weren't saying that during the hurricane.
Well, so there's things that I get about and there's things I don't get about it. So we're here in Fort Myers. We went to Fort Myers Beach and it's like, apparently a hurricane blew through 2-3 years ago or something like that, and they're still really rebuilding quite a bit there, especially on the beachfront areas. So I don't get that, but I do get the snowbird element of like, once the hurricanes are over, then we'll go down there for a handful of months where it's nice and sunny and a little bit warm. I kind of get it. So right on. Well, so Sandy, we're leading up to the holidays here. And a new year is probably the last cast that we may record before the new year. Possible we fit in one more, but quite likely the last one. We'll be back. Promise y'all, we're not going to go away for a really long time like we did before. So we'll be back no later than early January. But in thinking about, the reflection on the last year, things we're grateful for, things we want to see a little bit more of, I'm grateful for the fact that I believe that we are in a position as an industry to make sense of the work that we do and to go out there and continue to work with people, maybe even people who don't always naturally agree with us, aren't big time environmentalists. Let's continue to sell the value of this work we do and get along with people. I just want to get along with people more. I really do. I want us to try to take our differences and put them to the side as an industry. Frustrations about the energy code and how was it made and who was on it and was it good enough or did somebody vote against it? There's some things that are really frustrating going on, but forget about all that. Focus on the good work that we do. Focus on where our common ground is and stick to that. If you find somebody who isn't going to hear you out, don't try to beat them over the head with it. Say your piece, speak your truth, but and work on the ones that you can work with. Don't necessarily feel like, and this isn't just about energy efficiency or the building performance industry. This is about everything. We need more of that. We need more togetherness, more camaraderie, more working as a team in this country and in this world. And I'm committed to doing that. So I don't know, Sandy, does that resonate with you at all, buddy?
Yeah, I'd say speaking my truth has gotten me in a lot of trouble here lately, but I would say that, I agree with you. I think it's time to put down the guard and work together. It seems to me there's always factions that seem not to get along in this industry or little political games. And I think we've gone past that. I think we really have. I think we've gotten to a point now where I think our industry has proven its worth and its value. And I think that the other sides also have worth and value. And instead of fighting, we should get together and really make it great. And so I agree with you. I like that sentiment a lot.
I'll say one little thing here that happened in the last week that was a little bit frustrating. My colleague and former BERcast guest, Gayatri Vijayakumar, who came on the cast last season to talk about the 2024 IECC process and maybe some of the challenges with that process. Go back and listen to that episode if you didn't catch it the first time. She didn't get accepted to the 2027 IECC, committee, which I got to admit sort of feels a little bit funky to me. Like I think that Gayatri, it's not just that I think that she's great, because I do. I think she's great, but it's not that I think she's great because of a personality issue. I just know that she's an extremely hard worker and extremely pragmatic and very devoted to writing good standards and writing good policies and things like that. So I'm a little bit disappointed. Guess what? On LinkedIn, I kind of said that. I'm not saying don't say your truth. In fact, I'm saying do say your truth. But let's also accept the outcome. The reality is we got to move forward. Gayatri didn't get accepted. That's a bummer. We don't know the reason why entirely, and we could speculate. And it's not about trying to be politically correct either. Guess what? I ain't politically correct. Sandy, you know me to be politically correct? Not too often, every once in a while. I try not to be extremely inflammatory just for the sake of it, but at the same time, I'm also willing to be real and speak it out if I have to. So, I said something out there on the internet, but guess what? I'm not going to go and bring a big protest sign to the ICC and tell them that they did it wrong. The reality is it didn't work out well. Let's work with the people who are involved to make sure we get it right and we're moving things forward. I think there's some opportunity there. So that's kind of and I know that's like, you're like, oh my God, Chris, come on. That's like, the world peace, but yeah, guess what? I am advocating for that. I do want us to try to, I can't keep dealing with this idea that we're constantly fighting each other, fighting people who are more like-minded than they're not. And so I'm advocating for us to all draw off our guns and let's work together. Policy people, environmental people, we got to work with the builder community and the business community in order to figure this out. Guess what? Why? Because you have to, and business community, I would also say, some of y'all are all full with confidence now because the election or some things have been going really well. You got to realize what the work we're trying to do has some benefit long term as well. So we need to bring you to the table and stick with us here on the building performance industry. Sandy, what is your words of wisdom going in the new year? You got any thoughts here?
Well, I think that my overriding thought is cooler heads prevail, right? And it's sort of along the same lines as what you're saying, but a little different context, right? So on our last episode, we had a lot of discussion about, they just want to slice and dice the whole thing. And I just think that as an industry, one, we have to band together. I mean, there has to be a greater level of unity than there ever has been before. The lion has to lay with the lamb. I'm sorry. But, but two, I think that to a certain extent, that hyperbole and that fear mongering is not beneficial to the outcome of anything. And I think making the case, right? The strongest close in sales is a very simple line. It's called "I told you so." You can't deny that. I told you so, right? I already told you that, right? We can prove that what we do is beneficial to the economy, to the consumer, to the builder, to everyone. I told you so, right? It's the strongest close in the world. We have to make the case. If we make the case as a professional conglomerate and we make a strong case in an intelligent case without engaging in hyperbole and sides and all that, I think that we can win. I'm very confident of that. I don't think it's doom and gloom. So I would say that's my kind of outlook for the year coming up. I just I hope that our industry is matured enough to be able to pull it off.
Yeah, it's really important. I've been out here on a business trip here in Florida, but I did have a chance to, to talk with some other colleagues in the industry, ones that represent more of the corporatized home building community. And I will just say, at least from those who I've spoken to, they're not exactly excited to throw everything in the trash either. They're not excited to throw all the work that we've done and just light it on fire either. they've put a lot of work into investing into making their housing better. And yeah, I mean, obviously they may have cross purposes to a certain extent in how they communicate sometimes. Look, I mean, a lot of these builders, they're publicly traded corporation, has the obligation to deliver returns on behalf of its shareholders, and that's the beautiful thing about capitalism. It's also perhaps the ugly thing about capitalism, that sometimes um, those motivations can help to propel things to all different types of innovations in our world and in the human species, but it can also sort of push us towards things that maybe aren't the best for us, but they're good for shareholders in the short run. So woohoo! And we're going to talk about that in segment 3. I got something good on segment 3, but I'm with you, Sandy. I'm encouraging people. Let's focus on the basics. Let's focus on the things that we can all agree on are strong about the work that we do. Don't be doom and gloom. I'm with you. I think that's a great one.
You predict the future with your attitude. And that's the one thing I cannot stress enough is that, when you speak it, you speak it in the truth. So we can all go, I mean, I'm going to use a kind of a naughty saying here, but, shit stinks. You don't go around all day saying shit stinks, right? I mean, it don't. And I think we have project the positive, not the negative. You almost doom yourself to think. Anyway, go ahead, Chris. I didn't mean to.
So Sandy, what would you just go to?
I feel passionate about that.
You just go to a Gen Z like manifesting retreat or something like that?
No, man, my life is changing, bro.
Yeah, I think it's good. Yeah. So the one practical thing I wanted to bring up, so about what we can do for the people who are the advocates is, I think there is room for stretch codes. I think that, when we're talking about like there's base codes and there's stretch codes that are a little bit more advanced for communities that maybe want to adopt them. Let's stop making these things so convoluted and custom. I want you all to
I don't like stretch codes
at all.
No, because I think it screws up code enforcement something fierce. I mean, just look at Nashville market. There's a different code in Murfreesboro, a different code in Nashville. There's a different code, and every city around there they adopt a different version of the code.
Well, that's not
I think it just makes it convoluted and confusing.
Huh? That's not stretch code, though.
It's similar. I mean, you're jumping from side to side to side, like especially if you adopt by municipality. I just think it makes it difficult for the reader. That's all.
Well, I hear where you're coming from. So having to work in multiple jurisdictions and having multiple different codes that could be enforced, it does make things very confusing. It's not quite the same thing as a stretch code. Like take the state of Texas. It's all over the place. You can go, and Texas is a big place, and then you go to places that have literally no energy codes or no building codes. The state of Colorado has no codes. And so the jurisdictions basically have to adopt a code because there isn't any state code. But, whether or not, I've seen them work in the state of Massachusetts, but that's actually my example of where I feel like they're on the precipice of not working so well. The state of Massachusetts, we talked about this in season number 1, but they came out with a very advanced stretch code as well as specialized opt-in code. And very quickly, it seemed like there was enough sort of reconciliation from the building community that some of this might not really be that practical. And so they had to kind of take it back to committee and try to work out a public comment to factor in things like embodied carbon, a better insulation materials and things like that. And that's all well and good, but that's very convoluted and complex. And so I'm going to go and say, in honoring David Goldstein, who we are going to be discussing him in segment number 2, please, if you're a policy person or someone considering stretch code, go and crack open ASHRAE 90.2. ASHRAE 90.2 is sort of the companion to ASHRAE 90.1, which we think of more as being used within the commercial energy codes or large multifamily buildings. But 90.2 exists for residential. And what it is it's sort of an aspirational code design that is kind of like a stretch code and could be adopted like that without having to do a bunch of extra work. And it's something we can reference readily that's already out there. So if you are working within the policy community, if you're working in the advocacy community, jurisdictions that want to do more, look to things that already exist. Let's stop feeling like we have to reinvent the wheel, because the more we reinvent the wheel, the more we're going to lose people. It just becomes so convoluted and complex. You're counting points and figuring out credits for things that were completely unrelated to the energy code. And then all of a sudden, I feel like it sort of loses some of the momentum.
How about, like, instead of doing a stretch code, doing something like Texas did with HB 3250 or whatever it is, right? Where you just increase the ERI over time, like I think it's 7 or 8 years. And that way you're meeting the goals, but it's very easily understood, right? So like that could be a stretch code, really. I mean, it kind of is if you
Absolutely.
think about it. So
Absolutely.
like to me, that's what I mean when I say like having all these different, I think that something simple, that's easy to understand. This year we got to be a 58. Next year we got to be a 56. The year after that you got to be 54 or whatever. I think it's easier to understand, easier to plan for. You can plan ahead. I mean, look, that was one of the things that some of the national builders that are Energy Star for a long time. One of the biggest reasons, and everybody thinks, oh, they wanted to be Energy Star. Yeah, that was a market differentiation tactic. But a big reason was they loved it, is it kept them ahead of the code cycle. So again, I think because they planned, right? They knew that we're going to be fine. We're just going to keep following this path. I think that type of stretch code where you constantly decrease the ERA over time, I think makes sense. These adding points and subtracting and all this complicated, add-ons, and I think makes it extremely difficult. That's my opinion.
Right on. Do you have another practical one here, Sandy? Yeah, anything else you want to pass on as sort of a word of wisdom as we're wrapping up 2024 and moving into 2025?
I would say that I would like to kind of repeat one of our things from last year in our New Year's resolution episode was I'd like to see a continued focus on the industry doing the right thing from a quality assurance standpoint, from execution standpoint. It's getting to the point now where we're hitting critical mass. And I just think that do it right or don't do it. There's so much more at stake today, more than ever before. And I think it's only going to get harder. Be the expert, something I said my whole career. Be the expert, understand the program, execute it correctly, no matter what it is, whether it's co-compliance, HERS rating, Energy Stars, zero energy home. Do the right thing, do the due diligence, be honest with your builders, tell them up front, and hold them accountable because ultimately you'll be held accountable. So I would say that would be my nugget of wisdom for the next year is I would like to see the industry take the next steps in that process of doing it right.
God bless you, sir. I couldn't happen to agree more because we have seen firsthand at BER, well, I guess it would be more like secondhand. We've seen what happens when people don't really go all the way and when they don't really do the full thing. Guess what? Energy Star does have checklists. And when you check the check boxes and say that the things were done, that means that you're saying that it happened. So then when they didn't actually happen, well, the protocol is that we're supposed to address that, and that can be very challenging and complicated, way more than if you just sort of suck it up earlier on. And I get that everybody got excited about woohoo, 45L and Energy Star. Let's go ahead and shoehorn some of these houses in Energy Star. Guess what? You cannot do that, people. You got to make sure that it meets the full program requirements. And if you don't like the program requirements, get involved. Get involved in the public comment. Reach out to the EPA.
We all have a voice.
Yeah. I mean, Sandy, you and I have been talking to the EPA for years about their program and saying, hey, there's some things that could probably get perhaps a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more streamlined, or some things that, as aspirational and good as they are, maybe it just don't need to be in this version of the program. Am I wrong about that?
No, and I think that you make a good point. And what's amazing about that whole thing is that, you and I both separately and together have engaged with the EPA. And you know what? When they have things that they're not sure about, they engage with us because they know we're part of the industry and we care about it. If this is my career and this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, or at least in the near future, I want to be engaged in every part of the policy, and we all are allowed to be engaged. That's the thing. So when people say, well, that's bullshit, it's only bullshit because you allowed it to be bullshit, because you didn't
Exactly.
comment, that you didn't
Precisely.
give input. So I agree with you 100% on that notion.
Truth to power, my brother. Sandy,
Truth.
you and I are on the same page going into the new year, and I'm looking forward to putting these things into practice for myself, Raiders, we're encouraging you all to do the exact same thing. We're going to talk about someone else who spoke truth to power and who worked through the issues practically and pragmatically his entire career. Unfortunately, passed away in October. The longtime great RESNET Board of Directors member David Goldstein passed. And we're going to be talking about that along with our colleagues Steve Baden and Philip Fairey right now in segment 2. Okay, rolling here into segment number 2. Unfortunately, this is going to kind of be a little bit like our second episode of the BERcast in season number 1. So, ironically, episode 2 of season 2. We're talking with the same two gentlemen here. We've got Philip Fairey as well as Steve Baden with FSEC and RESNET, respectively, talking about the passing of longtime champion of the HERS industry, David Goldstein. David was a long-term member of the RESNET board of directors. I served as a member of the board along with him for a couple of cycles here. But David unfortunately passed away on October 18th. We're a little bit late in catching up here with these gentlemen about this passing, but it's notable. Why is it notable? Because while David wasn't a HERS raider, he was a tireless advocate for the work that we do in this industry. Worked for the National Resources Defense Council for several decades and really kind of became one of the leading advocates for building performance, and particularly the work that RESNET does and RESNET raiders do. I mean, really amazingly for decades, really helped to champion a lot of the work that we do and the value that we bring to the table as an industry. It really helped to pave the way for the mainstreaming of the HERS industry. And I'm saying this really as someone who was his colleague for a couple of cycles on the board, but in reality, I didn't know him that well. And so that's why we brought on Steve Baden. And Steve should have no need for an introduction, but Steve is the executive director of RESNET, and he and I have worked closely here for the entire time I've been in the industry. Some days he probably has heard enough of me, but we worked together quite closely on a lot of positive initiatives, and I've become a go-to consultant when it comes to especially things around the energy code and what we're doing with advancing energy codes. Steve, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and there's nothing better I'd like to do as an honor than to pay homage for David. I think you pretty much described his contribution to our industry and to the nation.
Yeah, well, thanks, Steve. We got the world champion, Steve Baden, the executive director of RESNET, and then I've also got the intercontinental champion, Philip Fairey, the international man of mystery. If James Bond and Professor Frink from The Simpsons had a baby, you'd probably get Philip Fairey come out on the other end. He's shaking his head. Come on, Philip. I kid. I love you, buddy. Philip, you're basically the guy that helped to design the whole HERS index calculation methodology and has really been one of the technical leaders of the industry. You probably don't need an introduction, but I think a lot of people don't know entirely about your history either. But thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. David was a very close friend of mine and was involved in what we do very early on, actually. He was instrumental in things that happened in 1999 before there were HERS conferences, and was instrumental in helping get what we do passed through a number of organizations, and was critically important to a lot of the things that have happened in the U.S. with respect to energy efficiency. A lot of people don't know this, but David was likely responsible for what happened with refrigerators in the early 1990s when they made tremendous strides in terms of efficiency. And David actually won the MacArthur Award, which is a very esteemed award for the work that he did with NRDC and refrigerators in the early 90s. basically joined all of the efforts that RESNET was making towards creating an energy rating index. At that time, it wasn't called an index, it was called a score. But David was critically important to that and the development of the calculations that we used in the HERS industry today. And David was actually present at the very first HERS conference that was held at FSEC in the year 2000, and has been coming to HERS conferences. And ever since, I think he joined the RESNET board probably in 2004. It might have been a little bit earlier than that, but he's been a board member ever since. And David's interest in what was going on in RESNET was driven by the fact that David was a huge fan of energy efficiency. And he thought that the most important thing you could do with respect to energy efficiency was make it show. He felt like one of the reasons that people weren't using energy efficiency more broadly was that it doesn't show. You can't see energy efficiency. Building performance was basically driven essentially by the fact that David felt like the HERS index made energy efficiency show up, and it made it measurable for probably the first time. And so that was why David had so much interest in what the HERS industry was doing and what RESNET was doing as an industry.
Yeah, and so I'm kind of showing for those who are watching the video of the podcast, showing the brief memorial here that was posted on the RESNET website. So yeah, David did begin serving on the board in actually 2001. And so probably was the longest consecutive running board member. And I think some people kind of look at that and they go, is that always a good thing, having people sit on the board for as long as they do? But I mean, I have to say, having been on the outside of the board and then being an insider to the board, if there's anybody who deserved to have that role of kind of almost like a standing seat on the board of directors, it really was David, because as a policy professional, an exceptionally well-educated man, obviously, PhD in physics from the University of California, Berkeley, really understands this both from an academic level, serving on the RESNET board. What I always found about David was that for being I don't mean to be denigrating, but he was a wonk. He was a policy professional, but he really went out of his way to understand how the work gets done and what the impact is, and if there is a change, how it might impact the home building community, how it might impact the rating community. I didn't ever find him to be someone that just either virtue signaled because of his role at the NRDC and the fact that, ultimately the NRDC, they're the Natural Resources Defense Council. They are an environmentalist group in so many ways. I never found him to be someone that lacked pragmatism. In fact, I found him to actually be surprisingly very open-minded when it came to the realities of the construction industry, the broader energy industry, and where energy efficiency and the HERS rater community really fits into that. Was David really pragmatic as I'm making him out to be?
Oh, that's more so. My first involvement with David was from San Francisco, which you would normally say, well, there goes all the red senators and congressmen, because they don't match. But what struck me most about David was how he could take these complicated technical issues and break it down to a congressional aide or a congressman could understand. And what impressed me was the ability for him to communicate, listen, and then express the benefits to some of the most conservative Congress people that was. Some of them, a couple of them were the founders of the Tea Party. They had a conservative congressman that ran against Ronald Reagan because he thought he was too liberal, and Senator Smith from New Hampshire, which is about as conservative as you could go. And he was able to explain why building performance is important, why efficiency was important, get down to what it means in terms of jobs, energy saved, and helping the economy. And I was just amazed going to some of these offices, which I kind of expected a really bad reception, and how he's able to talk to them and have them understanding. And all the people that I mentioned end up as co-sponsors of the bill, which is pretty amazing. And what I really drew confounding, because if you wanted to get down into weeds, he would go below the weeds and into the some of the deepest layers of clay out there. But then he was able to also then come back and talk to civilians in terms that they could understand. And I think that's particularly critical when you go to some people like I have in Washington who speak way above and jargon and stuff, where the aides and the Congress people don't understand what they're talking about. So to me, that was a strength that you wouldn't think so. Again, because if you think of anything in the pantheon of what Kate is, San Francisco and environmentalist, and he was able to bridge that. The other thing that David, and this is also credit to Philip, I think that, so 45L really, I consider David as the father of that tax credit. He's the first one that came up with it. He spent a lot of time going to Washington, and we teamed up, and we were kind of an interesting team because he was the technical person and I was the political. And I think that was really rewarding to me to see how he operated, and I was in awe of it. But the other thing that David did that I think was critical, and it may explain a lot that people may have guessed, and that is what Philip, and I think I give credit to both Philip and David for this. It goes back to 2006, because before there wasn't a performance path really to the IECC. And what they came up with was a proposal for a performance option, for a true performance option of the IECC. And they worked through ASHRAE and a number of meetings and stuff, and David was one of the spiritual leaders of this. And what it came out to be was in 2006, there was a true performance path of the IECC. And why that's notable is our reference home in the HERS index is based upon the 2006 IECC. The reason why we're still using that as the reference is certainly thereafter to 2006, they started throwing prescriptive requirements in with the performance. So it lost its performance ability for whole house evaluations. But that was a critical thing because that created a marker of a reference home that for the first time had combined code and above code programs. And a lot of credit goes to the hard work and analysis that both Philip and David did, because that legacy is still playing itself out. And it's why we have the 2006, because that has been the last time there was a true performance path of it. Philip, you might just share some of your experiences working with David on the 2006 framework.
Well, it was kind of interesting. And as you said, ASHRAE was also involved because a lot of the effort to do that came from work that was done at ASHRAE, and David participated in that as well, along with me. But we actually had kind of I'd say an intervention, essentially, with the DOE codes program, where there really was no performance path that made any sense. And so David and I put together a performance methodology for the IECC at the time. And it made its way into first the 2004 supplement to the IECC. And then it finally got in the final 2004 supplement to the IECC. And then it became part of the 2006 IECC performance method. And very little changed from the 2004 to the 2006 IECC. But RESNET settled on the 2006 IECC as what it was going to use basically as its reference case for residential energy performance. And we've moved forward with that ever since. And we still use the 2006 reference as well as the 2006 performance that's represented by the appliance standards that came forward from DOE in 2006 as well. And so basically RESNET's reference case has been the 2006 energy performance ever since then. And it's kind of interesting because it kind of tends to show how far homes performance has come since 2006, because a true 2006 home would have a RESNET index of 100, and we're now a good 40% below that or more all across the country with the HERS indexes that are being reported to the registry now.
It played itself into the tax credit, and a lot of that represented, and that's why I think he was able to communicate to conservatives so well, because what he did was he is the one who established in the legislation using the 2006 as the base case, and that saying that in order to get the tax credit, you had to be 50%, a whole house performance better than the 2006 IECC, which at the time, a lot of people never thought it was going to be possible to get it. And he just steadfast. He said it is possible. The technology there, the building practices there, they're just not incentive. Craft it in such a way, and his selling of it in such a way, is that this is not going to be a free ride for builders. They're going to have skin in the game, and they're going to have to put in money themselves. So this is not one of those free giveaways. And I think that was one of his strategies that he used that attracted normally very conservative representatives to be concerned that this is not just a government giveaway, but it was a kind of a partnership between the builder and the federal government to make more efficient homes.
If you listen to the last episode, our past guests have some concerns that there may be some goal to roll back how the new 45L is calculated based off of Energy Star and the Zero Energy Ready Homes program. So we probably could have still used David as an advocate. We'll have to carry that water. This whole story is fascinating to me because I really knew of David as being an advocate for the work that we did, but I had no idea that he was instrumental in creating the performance methodology that basically underpins almost all of the work that we do in the modern HERS industry. If it weren't for David and his work with Philip, what I'm hearing is that we would not really have the HERS index, at least not in its current incarnation, where it's a comparison to a base reference home that essentially is based off of the 2006 IECC performance reference home with federal minimum equipment. So we wouldn't have that. And according to Steve, we may never have actually gotten the 45L off the ground. And just, I mean, Sandy, think about the impact that it's made. I mean, is there a real possibility that you and I wouldn't be here talking from BER if it weren't for the work that David Goldstein did? It kind of sounds like that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's amazing. And, it's, I like to add just a little anecdote here because I've been in the business, I don't know, 17 years or something. And, I knew of David, but I really never got to know him until I was a member of the RESNET board. And it just so happens that we wound up sitting next to each other at lunch one day at a board meeting. And I spoke to him the whole lunch period. And he was one of the most fascinating people that I wish I would have got to know. We've been blessed to be around a lot of smart people in this industry. I mean, there is a lot of really smart people. Philip, you, Steve. I mean, there's a lot of people that, have been instrumental in this industry's growth and development. But just speaking with David, and the funny part is that ever since that time, anytime I was anywhere where David was, I tried to make sure I got to sit down and have lunch with him because I just found it, his conversation fascinating. He would, Steve mentioned that he could lose you in the weeds for sure. I think the last conversation I had with him was about the carbon index. And, I found him to be, just, a delightful person. And, the way he communicated to me and spoke to me, and he asked a lot of questions too, which is always great. And I really enjoyed David, and I'm sorry that I didn't get to know him more, actually.
So, and I think it goes back to reflect that you're right. Without the 2006, it would have been hard to point to a metric for the tax credit besides just say, here, you get $2,000 to build a home. And so that created a point where there is a performance base, and it's actually performance, not of just widgets like you see in a lot of rebates and stuff like that. And I think that was critical for for passing and for lasting it. And Chris, I think you're right. When you think about it, I think this whole structure that David and Philip built, by any argument, has worked. I mean, there's been more than 4 million homes rated based upon that platform and technical scheme, but also the fact that it keeps on growing each year. So I think that it showed that the marketplace did accept that. And frankly, without the marketplace, none of us would have jobs. So it shows that thought about that, and some of it is really abstract. At the first time when Philip started talking about the normalized modified loads method, my eyes just went in circles. I couldn't understand it. But I think that it's proven itself over time being the right thing. And again, it goes back to David, though, because he was able to take these highly complex issues and make it down to terms that people could understand, even I could understand. But I think the other thing is, as you were talking about, he made every RESNET conference except one. And it's a sad fact that he was on his way to the RESNET conference in San Diego when he had his first health problem. He collapsed and they had to take him to the hospital, and they found out that he had cancer, and that's the first he held. And so ever since that conference time, he's been struggling trying to be a cancer survivor. And I last saw David at the ACEEE summer study in buildings in this last summer in August. One of the things that David's last legacies he wanted to work on was dealing with the embedded carbon and calculating the time constraints of terms of embedded carbon. And he did do a lot of work. Unfortunately, I think he kind of saw that as his last legacy. The process is going on, but I did have the opportunity to see him because he'd gone through the cancer treatment. And when I saw him in August, he had grown his hair back, but he had lost a lot of weight. But he was still engaging. We had a poster session so people would come up. And he was like the old David. He was just as engaging. And he did get tired at the end, so I just filled in for him. But he said, I think I've whipped it. I think I'm on the right end. And then it was so tragic when David's wife wrote Philip and I and said the cancer had come back to the worst and he wasn't expected to last long. But I think until the end, David fought, and David was pursuing what he really truly believed in. And even though he retired from the NRDC, as Chris could say, he was still active on the board. He was active ideas. He was putting his whole energy into this embedded carbon calculation. So I think we're all richer for it. And in some respects, to me, what is a mark of a man in passing is not necessarily what kudos you get at the end or what kind of monuments are built. It's just the lasting impact that you left upon your departure. And I clearly say that the hose-hers industry owes a lot to both Philip and to David. And then, frankly, we would never had a 20. Well, actually, what David came up with was not only the 45L, he had 3 tax credits. The 25C, which was he really truly believed that consumers should be getting some rewards. So he was the author of the 25C tax credit for individual conservation measures. And then he also felt that the commercial side had to be addressed as well as the residential. So he had 3 different tax credits that were able to be put in a package, and that with the President George W. Bush, as part of the energy package that was passed after the first Gulf War, after the second Gulf War, he was able to that legislation was able to be put in the National Energy Act, and that's what created it. What's funny is that David initially schemed for a 10-year tax credit to give industry a chance to be able to adjust and to adopt to it, and then it would vanish. For the politics of the time and the budget concerns at the time, Congress only gave him 1 year. And we saw for a period of until 2022, the weird circus of the 45L being good for 1 year, not being good 1 year, being approved retroactively, being renewed another year. It was quite a circus. Those problems led to the newest version that led to the version that we have that goes on to 2032 and is based upon Energy Star. So it's a much stabler, and it kind of fits the original. And frankly, when he was launching the tax credit, Energy Star was just sort of a shadow of what it is now. So there really wasn't anything else to do except for the IECC. And that goes back to the importance of the 2006 IECC.
Yeah. I'm
Awesome.
just thinking, sometimes when I sit here and listen and I'm thinking about all this, and some of this is brand new information to me. I think one of the critiques that oftentimes a lot of people have in terms of their reticence towards advancement in the energy code is that the policy community, the advocates, the big time environmentalist advocates, they tend to promote the energy code in more of a, well, which method, if Sandy, in your experience, do you think the policy community tends to champion? The performance basis or the prescriptive code?
In that, I'll jump in first because there's been an improvement, but I've been involved with the IECC since 2006. And my observation of going through all these cycles is it's largely a battle of special interest. The basic war is between manufacturers who want to see their products get tax credits, and of course they prefer prescriptive because they know that their product will be in that house by law. The larger issues, which include a lot of times building performance advocates, some of the policymakers, some of the time, but I think overall those things were promote more performance. And that's what the critical thing of 2006, because it finally broke that barrier. And so now in scriptive and trying to get in the door, now the battle was, what can we do with 2006 to make it, the performance method to be it closer. And that's when you saw after 2006 insertions of more prescriptive things or backstops or whatever to be able to come in. And that's what we have today. But I think it is a strange world. But I think the key of the 2006, it created a more level playing field.
Yeah, we also have to remember that, technology's changed a tremendous amount over the years. The first codes we had, building codes we had, were in 1975, and they were ASHRAE codes, and they were totally based on the overall UA value for the whole building. And that progressed over time, and we had MEC standards in the 1990s, and finally we got IECC standards, and the MEC standards went into the early 1990s, and then we had IECC standards that started in about 1988, I think was the first IECC standard, and they caught up with each other. And it took a while to get to the point where we had computer capabilities that were actually capable of doing energy performance. And so that's progressed over time, and now we have really incredible computer capabilities that can do hourly calculations of the energy use in homes in a few seconds, actually. And so it took time to get there, but I think more and more the IECC codes are starting to depend on performance calculations. And I know that the building performance community is more and more interested in using performance calculations as compared to just simple prescriptive methods.
And frankly, building practice has gone such, as they say, that we're seeing homes in the codes now reaching the 70s and 60s. And at a certain point, you can't go prescriptive. And I think there is kind of consensus that the goal that we want to be is net zero. And it's almost economically infeasible to do a net zero energy home based upon prescriptive standards.
Yeah, and that's where I was kind of leading. Sandy, back when you were kind of working more directly with builders on a daily basis, when a brand new code came out and you turn to the beginning of the code, it starts with all the prescriptive requirements, and the builders, what they react like.
Oh, they freak out.
And especially with the 2021 IECC now, on how that's tied into a lot of programs, and now HUD and FHA financing, they look at it and they see that R60 and they're like, boom, it's like their heads explode. There's no way that I can ever do that. And it's completely cost ineffective. I'm sure you've had these conversations, right?
Lots of them. In my former life on the direct provider side, we converted many builders performance path, and very happily. But there wasn't a lot of education in the market either, right? And so it was just a matter of us educating on how they can meet these codes by using the performance path. And that's all thankful to the software development and the all these things that we can do now that we couldn't do in the past. So I think it's been monumental. I mean, I'd like to know what the stats are. I don't know them off the top of my head, but what are the stats of builders that are using performance path versus prescriptive path in the modern times? I bet you it's dramatically different than even 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to malign the prescriptive path. I understand the code advocates that say, hey, it's for especially small jurisdictions, small builders. Someone wants to build a house. How do you build a pretty energy efficient house without needing to do a lot of math? I respect that. I would challenge, though, that I think personally that we should reorganize the code book and we should put the performance methods earlier.
That sure helped the sales of builders.
Right. Well, that's what I mean, Steve. Because I think that we scare people out of the gate by saying, thou must do this. And it's like, well, but the reality is that's one option. Or you can do it these other ways. And we can find more cost-effective methods. We can find things that work within a builder's design. And that's what I'm trying to bring us full circle. I mean, looking at David Goldstein, a San Francisco environmentalist, he got all this. And he worked with Philip, amongst others, in order to realize builders are not one size fits all. The whole country is not one size fits all. People aren't going to be excited about taking the next step in energy efficiency unless they can quantify it and they can get trade-offs for the things that really work, that really they have access to or within their ability to adapt to their design. I mean, Philip, am I wrong that was sort of the concept and sort of the essence of all this?
Well, one of the things that I find very, very interesting is the 2024 IECC. If you try to comply with just the prescriptive pathway, then you have to do 2 additional measures that get you a minimum of 10 points that come from another section in the code. And one of the things that I find is just extremely interesting is that pretty much all of those other things that you have to do in section 408 of the code are very amenable to HERS index ratings, to the extent that there's one of them that gets you points for using basically Energy Star appliances, believe it or not. And so you can use Energy Star appliances as one of the measures that you're using beyond the prescriptive codes. And so even the IECC is moving towards something as comprehensive as the RESNET HERS index, which counts for all of the appliances in the home. Basically, hopefully the codes are moving in that direction, and maybe one day code compliance will be a HERS index. Well, it would be really nice if that was the case, because that way the code industry could do something in the time domain essentially and say, okay, you're going to have a HERS index of X this year, but 3 years from now, you're going to have a HERS index of X minus Y. And in 6 years, you're going to have something else. And the building industry would probably like that a lot, because they could plan into the future and start looking at ways to get where they're going to need to be in 6 years. And I don't know why code people haven't figured this out.
I have to give credit to Texas, because led by the Texas home builders working with the rating industry, they did exactly what you said as a code compliance option. They set out over a period of, I think, 8 years, scores that would go tighter and tighter down the road. And so that a builder knew exactly where you had to be, and they could build it in phases like that. And it seems to me the most logical way, because home building is a very complicated issue, and it doesn't turn on a dime, and it's not like a water tap. You can turn it on and turn it off. And I think the other thing to me, just since we're in this, and it kind of goes back to David because that's one of the reasons he liked performance, is frankly, without compliance, you have a piece of paper. And it seemed in this country, spend lots of money, lots of political juice arguing on what should be in the code, but very little time how it's going to be deployed and how it's going to be verified. And one of the things that we're seeing in states and local areas is that the HERS index does have a third party that comes in and does the inspection, has the assurance oversight. So I think that that's the glimpse into the future, because you could have the best code in the world, but if it's not enforced, nothing happens. There's no energy saved. And I think too often in this country, we spend more time fighting over what should be in the code versus trying to figure out how to implement the code. But I think this is a full circle going back and reflection here, because we're kind of going abroad, but I think that that's good because that's a reflection of David's thinking. I mean, he broke all these things and he was a visionary, kind of the vision what could happen if we could come up with a performance metric to measure efficiency of homes. And to do it such a pragmatic way that the industry would actually embrace it. I mean, when you think about Texas home builders lobbying the state legislature in Texas to have a HERS index option, shows the embrace that the industry did take with it. And the remarkable thing when you think about it, it's pretty amazing when you to realize that this was led by a person with a PhD in physics that worked for a San Francisco-based environmental group. It's just confounding, and that someone who is complicated thinking to be able to conversate freely with nuclear physics can take the basic building blocks on how the economy works. It's truly amazing. And I think that's one of the gifts that RESNET had in both Philip and David, because they both are steeped in technical backgrounds, but they're very pragmatic and understand how the world turns.
It's amazing when you look at the impact, and sometimes, unfortunately, as a people, we don't realize someone's impact until they're gone. And it's incredible. I learned more about David from all this, and it's mind-boggling when you really think about it, what a giant part of all this he really was.
Yeah, I think it's that, but again, that's a reflection that it wasn't dependent upon him. He created emotions in place that will go on long after he's gone. So I think it is, but Absolutely. He definitely believes in the pantheon of building performance in this country. Well, actually internationally. He was recognized for his work in Russia, in China, and India, in terms of having their codes and stuff adopted. So, and I actually got involved with David on doing some work in China. And so I think that, to me, that is the true legacy, is that what you create is going on long after you're gone. Is probably one of the best memorials or kind of views that a person could wish in life. I really want to thank you, because unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is in the background, and it is kind of like a black box. Who behind that curtain developed this the reference home, and what was that all involved in? And when you around that time, you kind of held up how these blocks went in, and it took foresight on David and Philip's idea that saying that this is what it could develop to, and why it's worth the fight to put that in, because that was not an easy fight in 2006 or 2004, I guess, when the real fight took place.
Yep.
I thank you so much, because I learned so much. And Sandy and I, we're both historians in nature. We like to know about our past and our ancestors. And David was a contemporary in a lot of ways for me on the RESNET board. Sandy, even for a short period while you were on the RESNET board. But I didn't realize just how deep his influence really was. I also want to just take a moment here, certainly not to upstage David, but in order to give a little bit of a memorial to another fallen hero that just passed away, unfortunately, in September, Ken Williamson, based in Ohio, a Raider that worked and owned Think Green Midwest. They're based in Ohio. Ken was in the industry for a long time, and I'm not sure, Philip or Steve, were you aware of Ken Williamson at all?
I was aware of him. I didn't hear that he's passed.
I figured, based on with your little bit of background, Steve, in Ohio, that you might have been aware of him. But Ken was a longtime Raider and advocate. His business partner, Holly Todd, passed on to me a little bit of a eulogy. Ken entered the industry as a builder, having built over 150 custom homes and seeing the need to plan for the future. From working with Habitat for Humanity to some low-income villages in the Cincinnati area to building multi-million-dollar homes, Ken saw that the little things could make a big impact. His key phrase was teaching classes, especially for the state of West Virginia and habitats, that a $2 tube of caulk turns into thousands saved. He worked all over the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, in the energy efficiency industry, inspecting for fortified homes program in the Mississippi and Louisiana area. And he was able to add his knowledge and experience to make energy efficiency work really at any price range. Taught for the state of Ohio, West Virginia, and talked many building departments into helping them understand things like codes and HERS ratings and energy efficiency programs. Never turned anyone down. Builders, organizations, energy companies, even with the Army, teaching them how to, build on a budget basically for the various home building projects they have to do for their soldiers. So he truly believed in energy efficiency as a way of constructing all homes. Ken was primarily a raider, but also a teacher. And the great things that David did, again, I'm putting him, on sort of that Mount Rushmore of the HERS industry, but it also takes us folks out there advocating for this work and being the boots on the ground as well. So I wanted to take a moment to also honor Ken, just because if it weren't for people who are willing to sacrifice their time and expertise for decades, we also might not be where we are today as well. So,
I entirely agree, because I think what you said is true of the Raiders. Well, particularly the first couple of generations of Raiders. They were really teachers. They didn't see a lot of money in this, but they had passion to drive it. And deep in their hearts, they were teachers. They wanted to mentor and improve things. And the combination of the big thinkers on top, but again, I agree with you, without the delivery and without the passion that the people brought in that at the local level and created the education to builders, we wouldn't be where we are. So I'm glad you did that, because it's easy sometimes to focus on the top, but the top doesn't do nothing unless they're the John the Baptist out there spreading the message.
All the real heroes are at the bottom.
Well, I agree. Thank you to all of the Raiders who are listening in and participating in this industry, helping to move it forward. A special thanks again to Steve and Philip for coming on the BERcast yet again. We honored Ron Hughes last year, and we're honoring David Goldstein and Ken Williamson again today. And let's all keep moving forward. Let's honor these gentlemen and the contributions they made in order to pave that path for us to go out there and have careers and make the impact that we do on the industry. Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us yet again.
Well, thank you for inviting us. And it was a very enjoyable conversation. Thank you.
We are rolling into segment 3, Sandy. All right, we're going to wrap it up here with
wait a minute. Let me stop you right now. Are we going to talk about the Lions losing this week?
Yeah, we have to. I'm still wearing the hat, but what did I say, Sandy? Mas cajones que cerebro. My concern with, here's the deal. The Lions are still in really good shape. They've had a lot of defensive setbacks. Obviously practically ran off the field, or so it seemed, but let's look at it from a different lens. They only lost by 6 points. And so despite how badly their defense was mauled, like the Bills really gave them, I think, an eye-opener. What did I say a couple weeks ago? The Lions are going to have a hard time with a mobile quarterback, and that's exactly the issue that they had a hard time with a more dynamic offense, especially because their defense has been down. But look, it goes back to what we talked about last year. And look, I love Dan Campbell, but that was just the worst call I think I've ever seen from coaching. For a coach to go for an onside kick, especially you have to announce it now, so it's not even a surprise anymore. Which, by the way, NFL, back that off. We got to figure out a different solution, because that is
go back to the old way of kicking. That's stupid. I hate the new dynamic kickoff. I hate it. Here's something I will say for Detroit, though. I read this morning 7 defensive starters are out right now. So, you got to give them some credit, right? The Buffalo Bills are not a slouch team, and they only lost by 6 points. That's number one. Number two, can we say anything more about Jared Goff? The guy, 494 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. The man is a player. He's a player, and the offense is good. Sucks that you lost. I think you lost Gibbs too, right?
Montgomery.
He's out with the season-ending. Montgomery, yeah, with the
Maybe not
season-ending injury.
not necessarily season-ending, but indefinitely.
Okay. But, I mean, what can you say about that man? I mean, every time I get on here, I bring him up. When we talk about the Lions, or every time we talk, you can't say enough. They didn't lose the game because of him. But that's a juggernaut team. I will still say that Buffalo and Detroit are the two best teams. That was our prediction of the Super Bowl last week. I still stick with it because the Vikings may be 12-2, but the Vikings are a paper tiger. I don't believe they can beat Detroit. But maybe the Eagles. The Eagles are a pretty good team too. 12-2, I'll take it over 2-12 like the Giants. So hey.
Yeah, well, if I'm going to rep my team big, I'm also going to stick with them when they falter. But, Sandy, as much as the world of sports is interesting, we've been promising that we were going to talk about something more real, and I'm about to do that. Let's switch gears from sports. Sandy, you don't even know this, but one of our long-term listeners who really loves loves the BERcast, they took umbrage to us sort of acknowledging that we believe that, there's a degree of truth of anthropogenic climate change. They said, there's other documentaries and other sources that say that that's not really the case, that it's leading us in a direction. And I get that this is really contentious as a subject. I've actually tried my whole career to focus on other things. I don't really go around talking about the value of the building performance industry in terms of the lens of climate change. I do believe that human impact is exacerbating climate change. I think it's happening through releasing pollutants into the atmosphere. I also think it's happening because we're destroying a ton of biodiversity that would otherwise be able to absorb more pollution from the atmosphere. And we're also just increasing the solar absorptance of the planet by cutting down a bunch of forests and prairies and things like that, and instead putting up roads and buildings and things that absorb a lot of solar heat. We could argue all day long about what's really going on with the climate and how severe it is. You know what I tell people, Sandy? I am not a physicist that deals with climate science. I'm not. So I'm never going to be able to sort out truth from fiction. I won't. I could have a belief. I could be compelled by evidence or research or studies or anything like that. But regardless of what I personally think or perceive, it kind of doesn't matter because I'm never going to know. But what I go back to is that pollution prevention is beneficial no matter what. And that's why I'm in this game. I'm in the energy efficiency industry, less about prevention of climate change, but more because I want to stop bad polluting stuff that hurts human health in ecosystems from continuing to run rampant all over our lives. And I got to say, going back to segment number 1, where we were talking about things we want to will and manifest about getting along, folks, the Attorney General of Texas, that Texas, the big red one, came out and sued a bunch of manufacturers for putting out forever chemicals, otherwise known as PFAS or PFOS chemicals, into groundwater, into the environment. They are suing 3M and suing DuPont for these types of chemicals. Now, Sandy, why this stood out to me, and it doesn't exactly have to do with building performance per se, but what it showed me is that a big red state with a Republican administration had the responsible reaction to a serious problem affecting the environment and affecting human health. And that there are now consequences that are coming out that transcend blue and red BS politics. And I am just relieved by this. PFAS is near and dear to my heart because here in Michigan, we have a lot of issues with PFAS. We're the Great Lakes state. Guess what? Just about all the lakes have these forever chemicals. Why? Well, we've got Dow Chemical based in Michigan. We have Wolverine boot manufacturer that took a lot of these, sort of weather, resistant, water resistant type of chemicals, and ended up a lot of this has gone into our drinking water, into our groundwater, into the Great Lakes, into the biodiversity chain, so that when you go and catch a fish and try to eat it in Michigan, not only are you going to be getting a lot of mercury from power plants, but that bioaccumulates up the food chain, but you're also going to be getting a lot of PFAS. And it's still kind of unknown what the potential ramifications and health issues could be associated with this. But, it's not a good thing to be eating PFAS. You're not supposed to be eating Teflon chips. It's not good to be eating PFAS. And then the other thing, and Sandy, I want to loop you in here in a second, but I want to bring up the other, some people go, climate change, I don't really care. You know what? Drill, baby drill, it's all good. I like my gas this. And look, I'm the first guy who said I still have fossil fuel appliances, and so I'm not trying to be holier than thou, but I also want to move away from this stuff over time. I believe in the value of electrification. I believe in the value of better buildings, more efficient, more insulated, airtight buildings. And you know what the reason why is? Because is convenient and helpful as fossil fuels are, and look, bless their heart, it's going to be around for a long time. We're not going to be kicking fossil fuels in the next couple of years, regardless of what some people might want. Part of the reason why we need to do this has nothing to do with climate change, but because it has human health effects. When we burn fossil fuels and then they get into our water, into our soil, it gets into our food, into our drinking water, because we water plants with the water that's coming out of these bodies of water. The soil absorbs it, the plants absorb it, then the animals eat the plants, and we're eating it basically in the animals, we're eating it in the plants. It's in us now because of this. And these are not good things. People are concerned about changing of human bodies, and what's going on with, I'm not going to go all the way there, but you all know what I'm talking about. People are concerned about what's happening to our kids. And well, look, burning fossil fuels and then drinking it and breathing it and eating it changes our endocrine system, which therefore causes us to be somewhat estrogenized. And I've talked about this before, you and I have, Sandy, but I want to set the record straight. This is not a blue or green thing. Caring about pollution and caring about our human health, this is not a blue or green thing. This is not something that I want to argue with people about anymore. I don't want to defend why climate change may or may not be real, because again, that's not my principal concern. My principal concern is over what's going on with our own health and how the activities that humans make may impact it. Sandy, am I crazy for stating that fact?
No, not at all. I mean, you and I once got on this program many episodes ago, and the one thing we said was that pollution may be the biggest threat that we have, bigger than climate change. And, I still believe that. I believe that's a massive effect. Look, between the microplastics and the PFAS and the, VCA, all these things that are, and they're finding it inside of humans, and they're having actual genetic alterations to us. That's concern for everybody. That's not a left thing. That's not a right thing. That's not an independent thing. That's a people thing. You know what I mean? And it's scary. The more, I never really even paid attention to this up until a few years ago, but the more I read about this, and the more that I look at all these different studies, and the fact that they're finding microplastics in babies, and they're coming out with all these messed up hormonal systems and screwed up DNA, and it's fundamentally changing us as human beings. And then you wonder why the last 3 years the life expectancy has dropped in the United States. Well, it's not hard to figure out. Now, some of that's self-inflicted, right? We eat a horrible diet, but it's also allowed. So, and I think there's multi-levels of this argument, right? Our food system is contaminated with chemicals and hormones and diesel fuel and everything else. And then we're genetically modifying a lot of this stuff on top of it. It's very concerning. It's very concerning, because what is the implication going to be for my children or my children's children if we don't get this under control? And, so I'm with you. I'm not ready to go get a Tesla tomorrow, It just wouldn't work for me. But do I realize that, my Jeep Gladiator Black Widow edition is killing the environment and killing me? Yeah, I get it. You can go at study after study. I mean, all of these things are linked, right? I mean, it's really not related, but it is kind of related. If you look at things like diabetes and you look at the advent of refined sugar, diabetes is in less than 1% of humans in the world in the turn of the century. Refined sugars come in, and now it's like 30% of the population. It's happening with pollution. It's happening with microplastics. It's happening with the food supply. So we're basically extincting ourselves by not being willing to not only recognize the problem, but to adjust it. I mean, look, you can buy things and use things in this country that Europe banned years ago. And not just food, chemicals, paint compounds, So, I mean, I think we really need a shakeup, and I don't know if Robert Kennedy is the right guy to do it, but somebody's got to start advocating for our health. And then I think we have to be good stewards of our own health too, right? I mean, that's part of it, right? Personal accountability, right? But a lot of it is to people who, are low income. Can they afford to buy organic food? I don't know. Why does an organic tomato cost $2 more than a genetically modified one that's full of pesticide? I don't know. But all these things need to be addressed, and this is great. I love the fact that you brought this up, because up until a few years ago, I never even paid attention to this. It's like climate change either. I never paid attention to climate change up until a few years ago, and then I'm like, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. Climate change, yeah, you can make the argument that climate change is a cyclical nature of the Earth. I mean, North America was tropical at one time. Also, the carbon is 4% of the atmosphere, and 3% of it's produced by humans. So right there has got to tell you that something is not right, right? So
Yeah.
I agree with this sentiment, absolutely, and I think it's becoming less of a red or blue or in middle issue, and it's becoming more of a human issue, because that's what it needs to be.
Well,
Just
and
like
that's what I'm
energy
trying to say,
efficiency.
people. That's what I'm trying to say, people. And it brings it back full circle about what we were talking about in segment 1 and segment 2, talking about David Goldstein and his impact, being willing to cross the aisle and be a San Francisco liberal environmentalist, but working with home builders and conservative Congress people and things like that to create the 45L tax credit.
How brave he was to even try to attempt that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, David was svelte, young. He was very, handsome and looked young up into the very end, but he wasn't like, a big farmer or home builder swinging big hammers and stuff like that. I mean, he was a guy of modest stature, of modest demeanor, but extremely practical in the way he conducted himself. And folks, this is kind of what I'm trying to say is like, let's get down to the basics for the things that we need to protect ourselves and communicate in that lens. And so if you hear from Sandy or me, hey, the climate, it didn't snow in Detroit until, the very end of November. And that's a little bit weird. It was, and I get to other places, you might have been like, wow, it was fine here. It was normal temperature or warmer or colder than normal or whatever. Look, don't think that I'm trying to be preaching an agenda. It doesn't have anything to do with that. What ultimately it comes down to is imagine that all the politics didn't exist. And we were just people that didn't have any of this on any of the big mainstream media news sources, any of the red, the blue, the green, the white, whatever it is, the party that you follow. Imagine that we didn't have any of that. And it was just us talking about our needs as humans. We might come to the conclusion that it is in our best interest to be more responsible stewards, not just of the environment for the toads and the frogs and the fish and the grouse and the bears and the wolves, but for us. And that the impact that we do by being more responsible, by promoting the building performance industry and energy efficiency, it's not going to solve all the world's problems, but it is going to make an impact. It is going to help to cut down on pollution that does have a downstream impact onto all of our lives. I mean, look, everybody's known somebody with cancer. Just about everybody, and the cancer exists for a lot of different reasons, but part of the reason it exists is because we're exposed to a lot of funky stuff out there. So that's my piece. That's my piece, Sandy. That's why I wanted to bring up, because, somebody came at us and we're like, you know what? I didn't like that they talked about climate change and acted like it was a foregone conclusion. You know what? I actually respect that. I may not agree. But here's the thing. I'm doing this irrespective of that. And that's what I'm encouraging you all to do. Think about it in a different lens. Let's stop with the things that are pulling us apart. It's a green agenda. And that essentially summarizes down to, does climate change exist or not? And that's the sad thing, I think, is that now it's like we can't, the people who are promoting energy efficiency, if you're not all in on electrification for changing climate change, well, then you're part of the problem. I don't agree with that. I think there's other reasons to be in this industry. Just like I'm saying, if you believe that we should still have gas and that, I think there's a rationale there that's acceptable. I think you can make that case, but you also have to understand, like, we do have to move away from these things over time. It is in our best interest. You just burning stuff forever. It's not just about carbon. It's about a lot of other things. And look, and you're allowed to disagree with me. Come talk to me again. Say, hey, Chris, you know what? I think you went on a rant about, pollution, and I'm not sure I totally agree. Come talk to me about it too. But I just wanted to let you all know this is where my compass is. And I'm excited the fact that the Attorney General from Texas, a big red state, is now putting his foot down and saying that we can't just continue on with these types of, behaviors that might have downstream negative consequences on us forever. The big of the corporation be damned. It doesn't matter. So I don't know. Sandy, what do you think?
I think that, I would say, I said this, I think in the last episode, actually, when we brought something about this. I'm like, I think you can't be more conservative than to be into energy efficiency and a clean environment. And I mean, I never understood that argument. Oh, you have a left agenda. Why? Because I believe in energy efficiency and green building? To me, that's a conservative notion. We want to conserve, preserve, protect. That's all attributes of conservatism. And I just think that, I think people got it wrong, and they get on these sides and they start fighting, and this is kind of going with our whole theme here of unity, right? It's like, we have more in common than we do not. Way more in common. All these sides need to get together, and really, we need to start looking at stuff like this, because this is ultimately going to be the downfall, not your 350 Chevy. This kind of stuff is really going to be the ultimate downfall of us as a society, a race, and as a planet. So I think all of it has something to do with each other, but, we're going to poison ourselves to death before we can fix the other problems.
Right on. And that's exactly what I'm saying. So, and look, and for those who are also extremely convinced of climate change and extremely concerned about it, keep doing you too. I'm not saying don't be passionate about that.
No,
you have every right to be concerned. But I'm also, and you can forgive me for, I'm not an apologist, but I am also a realist to understand that people are exposed to all different types of media. And I hate that it's boiling down to this, like, well, it's this or it's this. And the reality is it's all of it. And we're in the middle of it. And we have to solve the problem together. And we're a small part of it, but we're an important part of it as this industry. So keep your heads up, people. Please honor the legacy of Ken Williamson and David Goldstein as we're rolling out of this episode of the BERcast. God bless you. Have a happy Christmas. Merry New Year. All the rest of the good holidays that you might be experiencing at this time of the year. Have a happy holiday.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year, everyone.